Spider-Man is a 2018 open-world action game, done in a very Ubisoft style. You have police surveillance towers that by activating, you reveal more of your map. Put a pin in that for later. Said map having several different activities for you to complete. The game this reminds me of specifically is Watch Dogs 2. Another open world game with an emphasis on your relationship with the other characters. Also, to some extent, the game uses the bonus objectives as an additional way to explore the characters in the world. As far as open world games go, it doesn't reinvent the wheel, but rather it is a pinnacle of iteration, refining the tropes and mechanics from other games as they were themselves often refinements of the open world formula. The game feels much more focused than other open world games. Not only are the bonus tasks slowly revealed throughout the entire game, which helps maintain a sense that you're fighting through an actual living and breathing world, but the bonus tasks themselves don't feel overwhelming. From the get-go, 100% completion feels achievable as long as you pace yourself. Just complete some tasks as you head to your next story mission, which is good if you want to unlock the collectibles. From additional combat abilities to costumes. The costumes are pretty cool actually. They do add some unique combat abilities, but honestly, I like them because they're cool. Just a nice variety of looks, referencing the long history of this character. While there were times I got sucked into a just one more thing style loop, it was never to the point that I lost track of the main story. That's not to say the game never feels repetitive. I am still doing the same activities over and over, and some late game activities are just slightly altered reskins of earlier activities. The crimes in particular felt rather grindy. They're a series of events that you randomly see around the map, from traffic accidents to robbers. The first time I saw a particular crime, it was novel. The fifth time, not so much. Aside from those issues, there is still an engaging rhythm to these activities. It also helps that swinging around just feels good, with it being really satisfying to be able to build up speed and zip around New York. The combat and upgrade systems are pretty satisfying too, giving you a good handful of strategies and options for any encounter. Although in my opinion, the main hook of this game is not the combat or the swinging or the side quests. Rather, what got stuck in my head were the characters, with all of them having distinct motivations and even arcs. Like Miles Morales after the death of his father, finding meaning in trying to be a force for good and to help the less fortunate. One arc I would like to focus on in particular is the arc between Mary Jane and Peter, which I liked more than I honestly thought I would. At the start of the game, the two have broken up. The reason they broke up being tied to the nature of Spider-Man. Peter being a superhero is all about jumping in and saving the day. Well, the way he does it with MJ feels a bit patronizing. There's a specific example in the game where Peter's attempt at heroism ends up making things worse and undermines the work MJ was already doing. It's not as if she minds being helped out, but Peter's attempts to protect her has very much a shut up and let me take care of it vibe. As if she can't handle any kind of danger without Prince Peter riding in on his shining steed, or trying to anyway. The main arc of this relationship is Peter learning to accept her as a partner with her own talents and as someone capable of taking care of themselves. As someone who does not need to be kept from all danger. And Peter, to some extent, learns to accept the help of others instead of him shouldering the responsibility all by himself. Peter and MJ's relationship becomes a more reciprocal one, where they both look out for each other instead of one acting as a hero. Overall, this is one of the most satisfying superhero romps I've experienced. From the fantastic acting, to the really good action scenes, to some really emotional moments. And it is remarkable just how well paced it is. Open world games, by their very nature, resist any type of consistent pace. You know, you might just faff about with some side quest for hours upon hours. But with Spider-Man, it never feels like you're stuck on one development for too long. Even if you do faff about in the side quest for a while, it doesn't really distract from the main story to a significant degree. Part of the reason for that, I think, is that it slowly reveals the side quests throughout the entire game. Can't be distracted for too long if you aren't overwhelmed by choice. But another reason lies in the structure of the main plotline. The pacing pacing is maintained on some level because of how most of this game's story is pretty much build-up. Not bad build-up, mind you, but pretty much everything builds up to a dramatic showdown and a major shift in the game world. Look, everything's bad now, escaped criminals making havoc and all. That actually ties into a part of this game that made me more than a little uncomfortable. Namely how this game portrays the police and prisoners. Oh, by all means, I'm happy to help you rebuild your massive surveillance network and help you spy on citizens. Boy, I'm glad that this doesn't feel tone-deaf given the current political climate and that there is no government surveillance apparatus to worry about. In general, the game kind of portrays the institution of policing itself as infallible. But hey, it's not like the NYPD has ever come under fire for anything. It's not like the police handle several types of situations that they are not properly trained for. It's not like the police harass other cops who try and report and prevent wrongdoing by other cops. It's not like the police regularly assault peaceful protesters. It's not like the pop culture view of police can obfuscate the actual reality of the institution. Now, this game does bring up the idea of corrupt law enforcement, but outside of a brief scene at the beginning of the game with cops spot by the Kingpin, that role is relegated to Silver Sable, a private military company that is brought in as New York descends more into chaos. They supplant the police, acting in a more militaristic manner. Spider-Man takes it upon himself to disrupt their corrupt operations, from shutting down checkpoints to freeing people being unlawfully detained. The NYPD is in contrast the good guys, with them being famously devoid of controversy after all. What really made me uncomfortable was this combined with the portrayal of prisoners and criminals. Namely how they're portrayed as this supreme evil, as this constant threat ready to fuck up some people for some, I don't know, drugs or something? Why do you have a rocket launcher? This is exemplified by the prison break scene at Rikers, where not only are most of the inmates buff, dangerous men ready to pick a fight with a man who can lift buses, but when they head back into the city, they turn it into a hellhole, with them even violently taking over rooftops. Now, if they had just left the prison a couple years later when their sentence was up, this would have never happened. Like, imagine getting arrested for breaking and entering, then getting into a fistfight with Spider-Man. Also, good thing Rikers isn't a prison notorious for the abuse of its inmates, because portraying the victims of that abuse as all being completely evil would be a bit fucked up, wouldn't it? This oversimplified view of crime and its causes is kind of endemic to comics in general, honestly. And I get the need for baddies to face off against, but at some point it feels less like a power fantasy built around alleviating a sense of powerlessness in the world, and more like the paranoid ramblings of someone very concerned with the downfall of America. Kind of emblematic of a view held by a lot of police and their defenders. An attitude which views the community they're supposed to protect as a breeding ground full of potential threats. And if you're a cop who's not diligent, a ruthless criminal will be ready to kill you in a fucking second. One thing I keep coming back to is this fantastic Vice Games article about Police Quest 4, a game partially helmed by Daryl Gates, the LA police chief during the beating of Rodney King. And the game gives great insight into the mind of the type of police chief who would not only perpetuate this type of aggressive policing, but who would push back when scandal inevitably erupts. Police Quest Open Season presents in LA, where the press are irresponsible agents ready to twist words and situations to make the police look bad. A grimy LA full of crime and violence, full of gangs and criminals, where in order to save the day you have to torture the deranged queer that is a serial killer you've been chasing. I could do a medal. This article really solidified for me the problem with how police approach their communities, as an army facing off against an endless series of threats, where any reform in regards to the police is viewed as a roadblock to them dealing with those threats. So just shut the fuck up and stay out of our way. In pop culture, there's this view of police as grand protectors, putting themselves up against deranged monsters who have no hope of rehabilitation, risking life and limb to bring them down. And while that framework has some nice tension, it's not really emblematic of reality. But this misrepresentation carries on throughout pop culture, passing from thing to thing. And for a lot of people, mostly financially well-off white people, that game of pop culture telephone is their only experience with the police. And it creates an environment where state-sanctioned violence is justified, is viewed as necessary. If you were beaten by a cop, there must have been a reason. The world is dangerous after all, so let's give these fuckers tanks. But the actual reality of police work is not really like that. So I guess what I'm trying to say is fuck the police and fuck how this game portrays them. Despite the very problematic view of police crime and prisoners, this game is still good. with fun and creative action, cool superpowers, likable and interesting characters who grow over the course of the story, intense and heartbreaking moments. Overall, I liked it. Just wish it understood the police as they really are and not as the propagandized version, and that it understood prisoners as like people.